Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Imagine you're conducting this remote video interview, right, for a senior IT engineering position at your tech company.
Right, a pretty standard Tuesday for an HR person.
Exactly. And I mean, the candidate's resume is just flawless. Their GitHub repository is immaculate. But as the interview goes on, something about their phrasing or maybe their accent, it just seems slightly out of sync with the location they claim to be calling from.
Just a little off.
Yeah. So just on a pure hunch, you decide to go off script. You ask the candidate to explicitly insult the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the candidate completely freezes. I mean, the color just drains from their face. A second later, the video feed goes completely dead.
Because you haven't just caught, like, a fake applicant trying to cheat a coding test.
Right. You've just tripped over a highly sophisticated state-sponsored cyber espionage ring operating right out of Pyongyang.
Yeah, and they aren't, they're not trying to breach your firewall with brute force, right? They're literally putting on a digital suit, acing your technical exams, and just tricking your human resources department into handing over the keys.
The keys to the entire back-end infrastructure. It's just the absolute inversion of traditional espionage.
It really is.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. It is Tuesday, April 7, 2026. And, today we're looking at a world that is operating at the absolute edge of its capacity. We're talking about thresholds.
Right, because today's news, it really spans from, like, the microscopic behavior of atoms all the way up to macroeconomic shifts of entire continents.
Exactly. And our mission today is to extract the signal from the noise for you. We're unpacking a stack of reports from outlets like Reuters, Al Jazeera, TechCrunch, Science Daily, and Popular Mechanics.
Yeah, we are testing limits across the board today, finding out exactly what our systems, whether that's, aerospace components, quantum circuits, or just global supply chains, what they can withstand before they fracture or evolve.
Totally. So let's start by looking up. We're going to the ultimate threshold, which is deep space.
Oh, yeah. Artemis II.
Yes. According to reports from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, alongside France24 and Space.com, the Artemis II mission has just shattered this 56-year-old aerospace record.
The Apollo 13 record.
Right. They've officially surpassed the Apollo 13 record for the farthest human spaceflight in history.
And the precise distance there is 252,757 miles, which is, roughly 406,765 kilometers away from Earth.
That is just staggering. And the crew commander, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, who, by the way, is making history as the first person of color to fly around the moon.
Right.
Along with Christina Koch, the first woman to do so, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. They actually conducted a lunar flyby coming within like 4,070 miles of the lunar far side.
And the imagery they're sending back is just unprecedented.
It really is. They're capturing these Earth-set images, right, where our planet is rising and setting against these desolate gray craters of the moon's far side. They even witnessed a solar eclipse from deep space.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is, but okay, I want to pause here and just, play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
We are facing some pretty unprecedented ecological and economic crises down here on the ground right now. So does sending 4 people an extra few thousand miles past a 1970s record actually yield tangible scientific data? Or is this, primarily a multi-billion-dollar psychological flex by space agencies?
That's a fair question, but the psychological threshold is actually the core scientific objective of this mission.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, think about why the Apollo 13 record existed in the first place. It was an accident, it was an emergency rescue trajectory, a free return slingshot, just to get a crippled spacecraft back home.
Right. They had to go that far just to turn around.
Exactly. But Artemis II is a deliberate, highly calculated stress test. They are pushing the Orion capsule's fundamental architecture to its absolute limit, testing the thermal regulation, the carbon dioxide scrubbers, and the deep space communication arrays under sustained load.
Okay, speaking of communications, explain that blackout they experienced. Because they lost contact with mission control for 40 minutes while behind the moon. And that sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it's just basic orbital mechanics, Radio waves require a direct line of sight to transmit data, so when the Orion capsule moves behind the massive bulk of the moon...
The rock just blocks it.
Right. That line of sight to Earth is completely blocked by roughly 2,000 miles of solid rock. There is no internet, no telemetry, no voice comms. For 40 minutes, the crew is just entirely reliant on autonomous systems and their own judgment.
Okay, so it's like driving through a long, dark tunnel without GPS, but with the stakes of human lives in the literal vacuum of space. You know you're going to lose all sensory input, but you just have to trust the mechanical momentum to push you out the other side.
That is exactly it. And that isolation, that's the exact variable NASA needs to study, proving that humans can survive, maintain their mental acuity and operate these complex machines at these distances without real-time Earth support.
Because Mars is the ultimate goal, right?
Exactly. That's the primary hurdle for future Mars missions. When we send a crew to Mars, they're going to face communication latencies of up to 22 minutes each way just because of the sheer distance radio waves have to travel.
Oh, wow. So if something breaks.
Right. If an oxygen valve fails, they can't ask Houston what to do and wait 45 minutes for an answer. Artemis II is proving we can safely cut that umbilical cord.
That makes a lot of sense. And, there was also a really deeply emotional milestone reported during this flyby. The crew submitted a proposal to the International Astronomical Union to name a newly documented lunar crater after Commander Reed Wiseman's late wife, Carol.
Yeah. It really grounds the cold mathematical reality of orbital mechanics in, human grief and endurance.
It certainly does. But, while we are pushing the macro boundaries of aerospace engineering in the vastness of space, scientists are simultaneously breaking through barriers at the absolute smallest possible scale.
Right, the subatomic level.
Yeah, let's pivot to the quantum realm. Popular Mechanics is reporting that scientists have directly observed superposition in atoms for the very first time.
Which is a huge deal.
Right, because previously we had only seen this phenomenon in larger synthetic molecules, or we inferred it indirectly through interference patterns. But now we actually have experimental eyes on the atomic state itself.
But there's a catch, right?
A big one. At the exact same time, Science Daily is highlighting a major hurdle in the commercial tech world. Deep quantum circuits are failing. They're basically forgetting their earlier computational steps.
Yeah, the hardware is suffering from quantum noise and a mechanism called decoherence.
Okay, let's unpack this for the listener.
Yeah.
Because, to understand decoherence, we have to define superposition mechanically.
Right. So think about a classical computer, like the smartphone or laptop you're probably listening to this on right now.
Okay.
It operates on a binary system. A physical switch, a transistor, is either open or closed. It's a 1 or a 0. Think of it like a coin sitting flat on a table, showing either heads or tails.
Right. Simple.
But a quantum computer uses qubits, and a qubit acts more like a coin that is spinning rapidly in the air.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Yeah. So while it's spinning, it exists in a state of probability. It's technically both heads and tails simultaneously. That is superposition. And that's what lets the computer process a massive multitude of possibilities all at once rather than just one at a time.
Okay, but this new study suggests that this spinning coin is getting wobbly.
Exactly. Because that spinning coin is incredibly fragile. Decoherence is what happens when the external environment interacts with it.
So, like, what kind of interaction?
Yeah. Well, heat, for instance, which is really just the kinetic energy of vibrating atoms, or stray electromagnetic radiation. Even the photons that scientists use to observe the system can physically bump into that fragile quantum state.
Wow. So just looking at it messes it up.
Pretty much. The environment forces the spinning coin to fall flat onto the table. It collapses into a definite state of 1 or 0 before the complex calculation is even finished. The quantum circuit literally loses its train of thought.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If these quantum states are so violently fragile that a stray fluctuation in room temperature causes them to forget their own math, are we putting the cart before the horse by expecting quantum computers to revolutionize industries tomorrow?
Ha! That is the million-dollar question. And it raises an important point for the listener. This is why error correction is currently the holy grail of condensed matter physics. We are in what physicists call the NISQ era, noisy intermediate scale quantum computing.
Noisy intermediate scale, meaning we have the theory, but the materials just aren't there yet.
Exactly. The theoretical architecture is sound, but our physical materials are just too noisy. Which actually connects perfectly to another report from Science Daily today.
Oh, right, the LEGO study.
Yeah. Scientists at the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory LEGO have found a new mathematical framework to categorize space-time ripples.
Wait, stop right there. How do massive space-time ripples connect to stabilizing a microscopic quantum computer? Those seem like entirely different disciplines of physics.
They do, but it's all connected. See, gravity is the ultimate outlier in our understanding of the universe. We have this highly accurate mathematical rulebook for quantum mechanics that explains electromagnetism and nuclear forces perfectly.
But not gravity.
Right. Gravity, the macro force that governs planets and galaxies, it just refuses to fit into that quantum rulebook.
Okay.
Now, LIGO detects gravitational waves, which are literal distortions in the fabric of spacetime, caused by massive events like black holes colliding. By mathematically categorizing these ripples, physicists are gathering the empirical data they need to hunt for the graviton.
The graviton being.
The theoretical quantum particle of gravity.
So they are basically trying to write the unified theory of everything.
Precisely. If we can finally understand how the fundamental architecture of spacetime operates at that intersection of gravity and quantum mechanics, we might uncover entirely new physics. Physics that could allow us to isolate and stabilize qubits against that environmental noise we were talking about.
Oh, wow. So we have to decode the universe just to build a better microchip. That is a staggering threshold.
It really is.
But, while quantum physicists are battling microscopic noise, traditional classical computing is locked in a desperate war against a much more visceral enemy.
Extreme heat.
Yes, extreme heat. Science Daily reports that engineers at the University of Southern California have developed a high-temperature memory chip made from graphene. And this chip can operate effectively at up to 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which is roughly 700 degrees Celsius.
That's insane.
To put that thermal threshold in perspective, standard silicon-based semiconductors, the chips powering the entire modern digital economy right now, they begin to experience catastrophic physical degradation around 125 degrees Celsius.
Right. I mean, at those temperatures, the silicon literally starts to melt. The electrons jump their designated microscopic pathways, and the whole device just short circuits. So how in the world does graphene survive 700 degrees Celsius without failing?
It all comes down to atomic geometry. Graphene is a single two-dimensional layer of carbon atoms, and they're arranged in this hexagonal honeycomb lattice.
Like a microscopic beehive.
Exactly. And because of the incredibly strong carbon-to-carbon bonds in that specific shape, heat, which travels through materials as vibrational waves called phonons, glides through the lattice almost entirely without scattering or resistance.
So it just dissipates the heat better.
Exponentially better than a three-dimensional block of silicon.
And the practical application here is just massive, especially right now because of the artificial intelligence boom.
Oh, absolutely. Modern AI data centers are consuming gigawatts of electricity.
Yeah, and the byproduct of all that is an unprecedented amount of thermal exhaust. Right now, tech companies are literally draining local municipal water supplies and building these massive energy-hungry cooling towers just to keep their data centers from catching on fire.
It's a huge infrastructural strain.
But if you replace the silicon with graphene chips that comfortably operate at baseline temperatures of hundreds of degrees, you eliminate the need for those massive cooling infrastructures.
You fundamentally alter the thermodynamics of global computing. And, beyond data centers, these chips open the door for advanced aerospace applications too.
Like what?
Well, you could place memory sensors directly inside the combustion chamber of a jet engine, or on the exterior heat shield of a spacecraft re-entering the atmosphere, environments where traditional sensors would literally vaporize.
That's incredible. But the hardware isn't the only part of our digital infrastructure currently under extreme stress. The human supply chain maintaining these systems is being exploited in ways that sound like, well, a dystopian spy novel.
Yeah, this brings us right back to that scenario we opened the show with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
TechCrunch is reporting heavily on this sophisticated, state-sponsored cyber initiative orchestrated by North Korea.
Right. This is an operation primarily driven by North Korea's Department 53, which is a highly specialized intelligence unit.
And they are recruiting young prodigies from their top universities, training them intensely in advanced software engineering, foreign languages, and, get this, Western corporate culture.
It's a massive grooming process.
Yeah. And then these operatives use deepfake technology to alter their appearance and voices in real time on platforms like Zoom or Microsoft Teams. They apply for remote IT jobs at Western tech companies, ace the technical interviews, and they get hired.
And their primary goal is financial, right? Because the North Korean state is heavily sanctioned. So they infiltrate the Western tech sector to secure these lucrative six-figure salaries.
Paid in crypto mostly.
Yeah, paid in cryptocurrency or routed through shell accounts. And this stolen revenue is then directly funneled back to Pyongyang to fund state initiatives, including their ballistic missile programs.
Which is terrifying. But here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not just about stealing paychecks. TechCrunch notes that North Korean hackers recently successfully hijacked a highly popular open-source software project called Axios.
And this is where the vulnerability becomes systemic. Axios is a fundamentally basic HTTP client. It's used by developers worldwide to connect web browsers to back-end databases.
Right, it's everywhere.
It is downloaded millions of times a week.
Okay, so explain to the listener why an open-source library getting hacked matters to them personally. Like if someone doesn't write code, why should they care about Axios?
Think of modern software development like building a house. Very few companies manufacture their own bricks from scratch. Instead, they go to a public digital town square, the open source community, and they download pre-made free bricks to construct their applications faster.
Okay.
So your banking app, your smart thermostat, the checkout system at your local grocery store, they are all built using these free open source components. And Axios is one of the most common bricks in the world.
So if a state-sponsored hacker compromises the computer of a volunteer developer who maintains Axios, and they inject just a few lines of malicious code into that brick, every single company that downloads it inadvertently installs a backdoor into their own servers.
Exactly. It's the ultimate supply chain attack. They're basically poisoning the digital water supply.
Wow.
Yeah, and it proves that the foundation of our entire digital economy relies heavily on an honor system. Just trusting that the anonymous developer maintaining a vital piece of code is actually who they claim to be and not, foreign intelligence asset.
So if state-sponsored actors are hacking fundamental building blocks like Axios, is the entire foundation of our digital infrastructure basically built on an honor system?
Pretty much, yeah. And
Right.
this vulnerability creates a profound tension when we look at domestic policy right now.
Oh, right. The CISO budget cuts.
Exactly. TechCrunch is also reporting that the incoming Trump administration has outlined plans to cut the budget of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, by $700 million for the upcoming fiscal year.
And the rationale provided by the administration is that the agency overstepped its mandate by focusing on domestic election misinformation programs in recent years, rather than hardening physical and digital infrastructure.
Right. But from a purely defensive standpoint, stripping almost $1 billion from the primary federal agency tasked with defending national networks precisely at the moment when hostile states are utilizing AI deepfakes and open-source supply chain poisoning.
It seems incredibly perilous.
It clearly illustrates the friction between domestic political priorities and the escalating reality of international cyber warfare. State actors do not pause their operations just because a target nation is restructuring its bureaucratic budgets.
They really don't. And, these invisible digital conflicts are rapidly spilling over into very visible, physical, and frankly, terrifying geopolitical crises. The situation in the Middle East is currently the most urgent physical threshold we're facing.
I really cannot overstate the gravity of the military and economic maneuvers happening right now in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah. And I want to be very clear with our listeners as we walk through this next segment. The situation is highly volatile, and we are strictly synthesizing on-the-ground reporting from Al Jazeera, Reuters, the BBC, and RT. We are just looking at the facts as presented by international journalism.
Right. We're just looking at the data.
Tensions between the United States and Iran have reached an absolute boiling point. U.S. President Donald Trump has set a firm deadline, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for Iran to agree to a comprehensive deal and a regional ceasefire.
And the rhetoric accompanying this deadline is historically uncompromising.
According to multiple outlets, Trump has issued some stark warnings, stating that if the 8 p.m. deadline is not met, the U.S. military will completely dismantle Iran's critical infrastructure.
He specifically named power plants and bridges.
Yes, threatening to take them out in one night, warning that, and I quote, "a whole civilization will die tonight."
And the Iranian response has been equally defiant. They have formally rejected a 45-day temporary ceasefire that was proposed by the government of Pakistan, demanding a permanent diplomatic resolution instead of a delay.
And Iranian officials are taking drastic domestic measures. They have publicly urged their citizens to form literal human chains around their national power plants to act as physical deterrents against potential allied airstrikes.
Which is just a horrific scenario to imagine.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the military escalation isn't just a threat, it's already happening. Israel has launched attacks on the petrochemical plants at Iran's South Pars gas field on 2 separate occasions this week. And crucially, U.S. forces have launched targeted strikes on Karg Island.
And Karg Island is the absolute center of gravity for the Iranian economy. It's a small island in the Persian Gulf that serves as the country's primary oil export terminal. Roughly 90% of all Iranian crude oil is loaded onto supertankers at Karg Island.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah. So by striking those facilities, Allied forces are attempting to sever Iran's economic jugular.
Which has triggered a massive secondary crisis. The hostilities have effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping.
And for context, the Strait of Hormuz is this narrow waterway, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Approximately 20% of the world's total oil consumption passes through that single choke point.
So the Strait of Hormuz is essentially the world's economic jugular vein.
Exactly.
And when that strait becomes an active war zone, the global energy market panics. Oil prices have instantly surged past $110 a barrel. This isn't just a localized Middle Eastern conflict, it is a direct blow to the global economy.
Right. Because when crude oil hits $110 a barrel, the cost of manufacturing, international shipping, basic agricultural production, it all skyrockets. We see immediate spikes in global inflation.
And Wall Street is feeling it. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500 have been experiencing violent swings, plummeting on fears of a broader regional war and briefly spiking on rumors of Pakistani mediation, while energy sector stocks are just surging due to the artificially constrained supply.
And the geopolitical anxieties are compounded by nuclear fears, too. RT is reporting that the Russian government has issued a severe diplomatic warning, stating that any military strikes near the Bushehr nuclear power plant on Iran's coast could trigger a radiological catastrophe on the scale of, or even worse than, the Chernobyl disaster.
It's a massive powder keg. But here's the geopolitical wrinkle that really stands out to me. The BBC notes that several Asian nations are quietly negotiating their own bilateral energy deals directly with Iran, completely bypassing the U.S. deadline and Western sanctions.
And this is a pivotal indicator of a transitioning global order. Historically, the threat of U.S. military action and sweeping economic sanctions was sufficient to force global compliance.
Right. Everyone fell in line.
Exactly. But today, the baseline energy requirements of major Asian manufacturing economies are so immense that they literally cannot afford to participate in an embargo.
With oil past $110 a barrel and Asian markets securing their own side deals, are we seeing a fracturing of global economic compliance? I mean, how does a global market function when the main supply line is a war zone?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a shift toward a multipolar world. Economic sanctions and military deadlines lose their efficacy if consumer nations bypass them out of desperation for energy. For these nations, keeping their domestic power grids online is more critical than adhering to Western diplomatic mandates.
Energy security overrides geopolitical alliances.
Every time. They are willing to circumvent the traditional levers of superpower influence just to secure crude oil.
It's a complete fracturing of the old system.
Yeah.
And, the Middle East is not the only region where we're seeing vital infrastructure weaponized to force geopolitical realignment. Let's look at Eastern Europe for a minute.
Right.
RT reports that Ukrainian drone strikes recently targeted a crucial oil hub located in the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk. But this isn't exclusively a Russian asset. The terminal is operated by the Caspian Pipeline Consortium.
And that consortium is heavily backed by major American energy corporations, specifically Chevron and ExxonMobil. It pumps oil originating in Kazakhstan, not Russia, through Russian territory to the global market.
So wait, Ukraine is bombing a Russian port that hurts American corporations. It's like throwing a rock at your enemy and hitting your best friend's window.
That's a great way to put it. It perfectly illustrates how deeply interwoven global capital has become. You cannot strike a target in a major energy hub without sending financial shockwaves back to your own allies.
Are we entering an era where collateral damage is entirely economic?
I think we're already there. Modern conflicts are targeting the supply chains, the refineries, and the export terminals long before the infantry engages on the front lines. The objective is to starve the adversary of the revenue needed to fund their war machine.
Which means collateral damage is measured in global corporate revenue and disrupted supply chains. Meanwhile, Russia is aggressively pivoting its strategic focus toward Africa. RT reports that Moscow is rapidly expanding its military and anti-terror footprint in the Sahel region.
Yeah, this is a massive shift.
3 nations, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, have recently formed the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES.
And this represents a monumental post-colonial shift on the African continent, because for decades, these nations relied heavily on French military partnerships and Western aid to combat regional insurgencies.
But that aid came with conditions, right?
Exactly. Western support typically came with stringent conditions requiring democratic elections, human rights observances, specific governance structures.
And Russia is offering a completely different deal.
Russia, operating through state-backed paramilitaries like the Africa Corps, which is the rebranded Wagner Group, they offer absolute regime survival. They provide heavy weaponry and counterterrorism support to the ruling military juntas with zero political strings attached regarding democracy or human rights.
So in exchange, Moscow gains what?
Strategic footholds, access to vital mineral resources, and the ability to project power across a region that Europe traditionally considered its geopolitical backyard.
It's a sweeping redrawing of the global map. And over in Asia, the alliances are shifting just as rapidly. USA Today and DW report that South Korea is currently petitioning the European Union to step in and mediate diplomatic talks with North Korea.
Because right now, Pyongyang is ignoring Seoul and heavily strengthening its military and economic ties with Russia and China.
Right. But internally, North Korea is undergoing a profound cultural shift regarding its leadership succession.
Yeah, state media is increasingly positioning Kim Jong-un's daughter, Kim Ju-ae, who is believed to be in her early teens, as the likely heir to the regime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, recent propaganda broadcasts feature her prominently inspecting ballistic missiles and driving armored tanks alongside her father.
Why is that significant, though? I mean, the Kim dynasty has always passed power down family lines.
Because since the state's founding in 1948, the regime's power structure has been strictly unyieldingly patriarchal. The military and the ruling Workers' Party are deeply conservative institutions. Preparing the populace and the military elite to accept a young female commander-in-chief is an unprecedented pivot.
So what does that signal to the outside world?
Two things. First, that the Kim bloodline remains absolutely secure despite any rumors of Kim Jong-un's health issues. And second, that they are willing to fundamentally alter their domestic cultural norms just to ensure regime continuity.
Fascinating. And as we discussed earlier, the geopolitical friction in the Middle East is terrifying other regions too. Reports indicate that Central Asian nations are completely paralyzed by the U.S.-Iran conflict.
They're caught in an impossible dilemma.
Right. Because if the Iranian regime collapses under Allied strikes, they fear a massive influx of refugees and terrorist insurgencies spilling over their southern borders. But if Iran somehow emerges victorious, or even just significantly strengthens its regional hegemony, Central Asia fears they will be forced to abandon their neutral foreign policies and strictly align their economies with Beijing and Moscow just for protection.
Every single geopolitical threshold we have analyzed today reveals these complex systems operating under immense, unsustainable pressure.
Okay, let's take a collective breath here.
Yeah.
We have dissected some incredibly heavy, immediate realities.
Yeah.
I want to shift our focus to the endurance of physical and biological systems over time. Let's look at what survives after the warfare and the geopolitical maneuvering fades into history.
We're talking about archaeological endurance now.
Yes. Popular Mechanics published a phenomenal report this week regarding the discovery of Marge.
Marge.
Yeah, this is a World War II P-38 Lightning fighter plane, flown by Major Richard Bong, the United States' top-scoring flying ace of the war. The aircraft was just discovered, perfectly preserved, buried deep in the dense jungles of Papua New Guinea, exactly 80 years after it was lost.
And the P-38 was just a marvel of mid-century aerospace engineering, instantly recognizable by its twin-boom design and central nacelle.
It's amazing to consider the contrast. We just discussed how modern drones are destroying complex energy infrastructure in Ukraine, and here we have a machine built for a global war 8 decades ago, swallowed by the jungle, yet the aluminum airframe survived the extreme humidity and organic decay.
It's a testament to the engineering.
But it isn't just planes. Marine archaeologists are currently exploring what is widely considered the holy grail of shipwrecks.
The Spanish galleon, the San Jose.
Sunk in 1708 by a British naval squadron off the coast of Cartagena during the War of the Spanish Succession. The ship is resting over 2,000 feet below the surface of the Caribbean Sea. And researchers are currently using these highly advanced, remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, to map the wreckage without disturbing it.
And the estimated value of the cargo gold coins, silver bullion, and raw emeralds is a staggering $17 billion.
So what does this all mean for us? It's like a $17 billion lottery ticket sitting at the bottom of a pool that nobody can agree on how to fish out.
That's exactly it. The San Jose represents an entirely different type of geopolitical conflict. That $17 billion isn't just treasure. It is the center of a massive multinational legal war over cultural heritage and sovereign jurisdiction.
Right, because nobody can agree on who actually owns it.
Mm.
You have the Colombian government claiming it as national patrimony because it is in their territorial waters.
Right.
You have the Kingdom of Spain invoking international maritime law, arguing it was a sovereign state vessel that was sunk in combat, so it remains Spanish property forever. Then you have a U.S.-based commercial salvage company claiming they found the coordinates first decades ago and deserve half the value. And you even have the Cara indigenous nation of Bolivia rightly pointing out that the gold and silver were originally mined from the Andes by their ancestors under forced colonial labor.
It is a $17 billion legal labyrinth. It forces international courts to weigh the rights of the modern nation-state against indigenous historical grievances and against the commercial incentives of private archaeology. Exploring the wreck with ROVs is the easy part. Navigating the human politics of the cargo, that's the actual challenge.
It seems like recognizing historical patterns is the only way we resolve these disputes. Speaking of historical patterns, Popular Mechanics also ran a fascinating retrospective on the biological endurance of Nikola Tesla.
Oh, this was fascinating.
The legendary inventor died in 1943 at the age of 87. In an era where the average male life expectancy was hovering around 63 years, Tesla outlived his peers by over 2 decades. And the protocols he used to achieve this longevity sound shockingly like a modern Silicon Valley health guru.
He was highly meticulous about his metabolic inputs.
Exactly. Tesla practiced strict intermittent fasting, consuming only 2 meals a day. He adhered to a heavily plant-based diet, specifically avoiding meat to keep his internal uric acid levels low, and he rigorously balanced intense, obsessive bursts of intellectual work with strict, calculated sleep schedules.
When you analyze Tesla's routine through the lens of modern biology, the mechanisms actually make perfect sense. By eating only twice a day, he routinely triggered cellular autophagy.
Which is?
It's the process where the body, lacking immediate caloric input, begins clearing out damaged cellular components and misfolded proteins to use for energy. This reduces systemic inflammation and actually slows biological aging.
And limiting uric acid by avoiding heavy meat.
High uric acid is a byproduct of metabolizing purines, which are heavily concentrated in red meat. It causes joint inflammation like gout and significantly impairs endothelial function, which restricts cardiovascular blood flow. Yeah, Tesla wasn't a modern doctor, but he viewed his biological body as a mechanical engine. He recognized the specific fuel mixture required to prevent oxidative stress so his brain could operate at maximum efficiency.
If a genius from the 19th century basically predicted modern intermittent fasting, does this mean our modern biohacking is just rediscovering old wisdom?
Pretty much. True genius is pattern recognition. Tesla recognized the mechanical efficiency required for his body to support his mind. Similarly, recovering the P-38 or the San Jose is about recognizing the patterns of our past to educate the future.
We are just rediscovering historical data. And this necessity to respect historical data naturally extends to our understanding of the planet itself. Science Daily published a groundbreaking report this week that fundamentally alters our understanding of Earth's climate history.
They're focusing on the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, commonly referred to as the ACC.
The ACC is a colossal mechanism. It is the only ocean current that flows completely unobstructed around the entire globe, continuously circling Antarctica. It transports more water than all the rivers on Earth combined.
It's massive.
For decades, geologists believed this current formed simply because the tectonic plates shifted, pulling South America and Australia away from Antarctica and opening up a gateway for the water to flow. But this new research proves it was infinitely more complex.
It wasn't just the geography, it was the atmosphere.
Exactly. The researchers discovered that while the tectonic gateways opened, it was a massive shift in global wind alignments that actually kick-started the current. And here is the crucial mechanism. As the ACC gained immense rotational speed millions of years ago, it began pulling deep, carbon-rich ocean water to the surface. Phytoplankton absorbed the CO2, died, and sank to the ocean floor. The current effectively sequestered staggering amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, drastically cooling the planet and driving Earth into its current ice-covered polar state.
It is the Earth's ultimate climate thermostat.
So if this current effectively froze the planet by trapping CO2 millions of years ago, what happens if modern climate change disrupts the winds that power it?
The consequences are severe. The ACC acts as the Earth's primary air conditioning unit. But modern Human-driven climate change is rapidly warming the southern oceans and shifting the very wind patterns that power the current.
Meaning?
If the current's speed or depth profile changes, its ability to act as a carbon sink diminishes. If the ACC stops pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, or worse, if the deep water upwelling begins releasing millions of years of stored carbon back into the air,
Huh.
it would trigger a catastrophic feedback loop.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Global warming would accelerate exponentially, far beyond the projections of our current climate models. The planet relies on these massive interconnected fluid dynamics operating within highly specific thresholds.
And we are seeing similar requirements for specific delicate geometries on a smaller ecological scale, too. Another Science Daily report highlights a major breakthrough in coastal engineering.
The oyster reefs.
Yes. Researchers have been trying to restore dying oyster populations by building artificial reefs, but they discovered that just dumping piles of empty shells into the ocean doesn't work. The larvae just don't survive.
The ocean easily washes them away, or predators consume them.
Right. But researchers found that if they meticulously construct artificial reefs using biomimicry, specifically mimicking the intricate fractal geometric patterns of natural oyster beds, the survival rates of the oysters skyrocket globally.
It's about fluid dynamics again. The natural geometric complexity of a living reef acts as a baffle. It dissipates the kinetic energy of ocean waves, creating tiny pockets of calm water where the delicate oyster larvae can safely attach and grow.
And it keeps predators out.
Exactly. When human engineering humbly copies the proven geometry of nature, the ecosystem recovers.
Nature has already run the millions of years of trial and error required to find the perfect blueprint. We just had to be smart enough to trace it.
Yeah.
But as a species, we don't just have to manage our impact on the natural world. We have to manage the staggeringly complex artificial systems we've built on top of it. Which brings us to our final threshold today: how we regulate human behavior through law, technology, and commerce.
The architecture of human jurisdiction.
Let's start with digital jurisdiction. TechCrunch reports that Apple is officially appealing to the United States Supreme Court in its long-running, incredibly bitter antitrust battle with Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite. The core of this legal war is Apple's absolute control over its App Store ecosystem.
Apple essentially acts as the sovereign government of the iOS operating system.
Precisely. They mandate a 30% commission on all digital sales that occur within applications downloaded from their store. When courts previously ordered Apple to allow developers to link to external third-party payment systems so consumers could find cheaper prices, Apple complied, but instituted a new rule demanding a 27% fee on those external transactions anyway.
Naturally.
Epic Games argues this is blatant monopolistic behavior designed to suffocate free commerce. Apple argues that the fees are required to maintain the security and integrity of their platform, preventing malware and fraud.
It is a battle over who gets to construct the toll booths on the digital highway. But while Apple is fighting desperately to maintain control over its closed ecosystem, state governments are currently losing their ability to regulate financial borders.
This is a wild story. Reuters reports that a U.S. federal appeals court has officially ruled against the state of New Jersey. The state was attempting to regulate and block a platform called Kalshi.
Kalshi operates a prediction market.
It allows everyday users to place financial wagers on the outcomes of real-world events. Not sports, but reality. You can bet on congressional elections, Supreme Court decisions, the monthly inflation rate, or whether the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed by Friday.
Wow.
New Jersey argued this was unregulated gambling that threatened public integrity. The federal court disagreed, essentially overriding state-level gaming regulations and opening the door for the financialization of reality itself.
Financial technologies are evolving infinitely faster than the legislative branches can draft laws to contain them. Prediction markets argue that they provide valuable crowdsourced data on the probability of future events.
But let me push back on that. Betting on real-world events feels like turning the news into a casino. If I can log onto an app and legally place a $1 million bet that oil prices will spike because a Middle Eastern pipeline gets attacked, doesn't that inherently create a massive financial incentive for bad actors to actually go sabotage a pipeline just to win the bet?
The commodification of chaos.
Right. If prediction markets operate without state regulation, do we risk creating a financial incentive for people to manipulate real-world events?
It's a very real concern. Yes, when you allow massive amounts of unregulated capital to wager on political or social instability, you incentivize the manipulation of the very events being bet on. It is a highly dangerous threshold for civil society to cross.
And speaking of the intersection of law and political events, the BBC notes today that the U.S. Supreme Court has paved the way for the potential dismissal of Steve Bannon's contempt of Congress conviction, a charge stemming from his refusal to comply with subpoenas regarding the January 6 investigations. The legal landscape is shifting rapidly, reflecting the broader political turbulence.
Everything is in flux.
And finally, we see these macro-level shifts trickling all the way down to our daily consumer habits. Yahoo Finance reports that Burger King has revamped their flagship sandwich, the Whopper, and backed by an aggressive marketing campaign, they are successfully eating into McDonald's domestic market share in the ongoing fast food wars.
While it may seem trivial compared to, quantum superposition or Iranian oil exports, the fast food industry is actually a highly accurate, granular economic indicator.
Cross-pollinate this for us. How does the fast food war connect to the rest of today's deep dive?
It goes back to the Strait of Hormuz.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When global oil prices surge past $110 a barrel, transportation costs rise, which means the cost of groceries and basic goods increases. Inflation spikes. When the middle class feels the immediate squeeze of inflation, their discretionary spending habits shift rapidly.
They stop eating at casual sit-down restaurants.
Exactly, and trade down to the fast food drive-thru. And within that drive-thru ecosystem, they become hyper-focused on perceived value. Burger King capitalizing on this moment isn't just a win for their culinary team, it is a reflection of a heavily budget-conscious consumer base reacting to the macroeconomic pressures created by geopolitical instability.
So the price of crude oil directly dictates the battle for the value meal.
It is all seamlessly, terrifyingly connected.
Well, you have made it to the end of an incredibly dense journey. Let's summarize the absolute breadth of what we've covered today. We started by looking up, watching the Artemis II crew test the limits of human endurance in aerospace engineering 250,000 miles away on the dark side of the moon.
We zoomed into the subatomic realm, analyzing how quantum computers are battling the environmental noise of decoherence, while physicists attempt to map the ripples of spacetime to build a unified theory of the universe.
We discussed the material science of graphene chips designed to withstand the thermal exhaust of the AI revolution, and the covert digital warfare of state-sponsored operatives infiltrating our open-source supply chains.
We analyzed the high-stakes, volatile geopolitical brinkmanship threatening the global energy supply in the Middle East and the shifting post-colonial alliances reshaping the maps of Africa and Asia.
We took a moment to appreciate the physical endurance of an 80-year-old fighter plane, the $17 billion legal war over a sunken galleon, and the metabolic genius of Nikola Tesla.
And finally, we looked at how the Earth regulates its own climate through immense ocean currents, and how human society struggles to regulate its digital monopolies and financial prediction markets.
Today, we extensively analyze thresholds. We possess the engineering brilliance to build semiconductor memory that survives 1300 degrees. We have the mechanical capability to slingshot humans hundreds of thousands of miles into the freezing void of deep space and bring them home safely.
We are learning to observe the probabilistic nature of atoms and decode the fundamental gravity of the cosmos.
But as we see with the rising geopolitical tensions, the vulnerability of our digital supply chains, and the fragile, easily disrupted state of both quantum qubits and global oil markets.
Our greatest challenge isn't building the technology to cross the threshold. It's managing the human noise and chaos once we get there. Think about that the next time you look up at the moon.
What a profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. In human anatomy, there are these certain vulnerabilities that are just so absolute that a single point of pressure can shut down the entire biological system.
Right, like a carotid artery?
Or a windpipe.
Exactly.
And we accept that biological fragility as a fact of nature. But when we look at the planetary economy, we tend to operate under this illusion of redundancy.
Yeah, we assume the global market is just vast enough to route around any blockage.
We do. Until you look at a map and trace a finger over the Strait of Hormuz. Because right now, we are facing a rapidly escalating crisis, centering entirely on that vital shipping lane.
And it's moving incredibly fast. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a hardline Tuesday deadline. The rhetoric is intense, threatening to, take out Iran in one night or bomb them into the Stone Age if the strait isn't reopened.
Right, and that's a threat punctuated by definitive U.S. military strikes on Iran's Karg Island oil terminal. So, for today's discussion, I'll be representing the position that credible military deterrence and, frankly, hardline ultimatums are an essential mechanism to break diplomatic stalemates and protect global energy markets.
And I'll represent the opposing view, which is that this kind of maximum pressure brinkmanship actually destabilizes the global economy. It enriches adversaries, and it actively accelerates a post-Western multipolar trade system.
Which is a huge claim, but I think we have to start with the foundational reality on the ground, the physical choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, its closure just can't be tolerated by the international community under any circumstances.
Well, it's definitely a bottleneck.
It's 30% of the world's seaborne oil. 30%.
Yeah. Passing through a channel that is, only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point?
Exactly. And the immediate consequences of its closure are undeniable. Global energy markets are essentially being held hostage, with oil spiking well above $110 a barrel.
Mm-hmm.
In this kind of systemic disruption, it requires an immediate, undeniable counterforce. The global economy literally cannot function when a rogue actor can just unilaterally sever its primary energy artery.
But applying unilateral military force as your enforcement mechanism, it's a geopolitical boomerang.
How so? It enforces freedom of navigation.
Because threatening to wipe out a whole civilization just to lower the price of oil, that doesn't stabilize the world. It actively accelerates a fragmented, multi-vector global order. Look at the immediate economic paradox here. The blockade and the market panic that followed it are actually generating billions of dollars in windfall revenue for Russia.
Well, they're taking advantage of the panic, sure.
They're capitalizing on it entirely. Moscow is using the shifting trade dynamics to fund its own objectives. So while the strategy claims to secure Western hegemony or enforce the rules-based order, it practically hands leverage to rival states.
But you can't just let the Strait stay closed.
No, but look at the planetary perspective. Eastern and Global South nations, from Asia down to Latin America, they simply cannot afford $110 oil or the massive debt servicing costs that come with that kind of inflation.
Right. It crushes emerging markets.
Exactly. So they are being forced to actively bypass Western financial and diplomatic structures just to secure their own economic survival. The cure in this case is fundamentally worse than the disease.
Okay, but that argument assumes the diplomatic alternatives are actually viable, which they aren't.
They aren't?
Iran has systematically rejected every diplomatic off-ramp presented to them. Pakistan proposed a highly reasonable 45-day ceasefire to de-escalate the region, and Tehran just flatly rejected it.
Well, the conditions of that ceasefire were...
They didn't just reject it, they escalated. They fired ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia, which forced the closure of the King Fahd Causeway. That is the only bridge linking Saudi Arabia to Bahrain.
I know, but...
So when an adversary responds to diplomatic overtures with ballistic missiles aimed at civilian infrastructure, ambiguous posturing fails. The strikes on the Karg Island oil terminal deliver the only language that ensures long-term stability, which is undeniable economic and military consequences.
I disagree that it ensures stability.
The looming Tuesday deadline forces clarity. Look at the equity markets right now. The S&P 500 has actually seen slight gains, and institutional investors are engaging in dip buying.
Yeah, purely on a gamble.
They are doing it on the calculation that this immense, crushing pressure will force a last-minute ceasefire. Unpredictability, when you back it up with overwhelming kinetic force, is a valid tactical tool to break a stalemate.
Okay, but Wall Street trading algorithms pricing in a last-minute deal, that fundamentally misreads the psychology of the adversary.
Why? It's a hostage negotiation. If a bank robber has barricaded the doors, dropping the threat of a swap breach doesn't make the hostages safer, it just normalizes the barricade.
Except we aren't talking about a bank robber, we're talking about a nation-state. Threatening to bomb a nation into the Stone Age doesn't trigger a rational cost-benefit analysis where the regime just quietly capitulates. It triggers an existential defense mechanism.
They brought it on themselves by closing the Strait.
Regardless of how we got here, the threat of total destruction makes diplomatic concession politically impossible for the Iranian government. Just look at the specific intelligence emerging from the region right now.
You mean the civilian mobilization?
Yes. The remarkable resilience of the local populace. There are widespread calls for ordinary citizens to form human chains around power plants and civilian infrastructure to protect them from U.S. strikes.
But that's a tragedy engineered entirely by the regime. They are using their people as props.
Engineered or not, when you back a regime into a corner where surrender looks indistinguishable from annihilation, they dig in. The ultimatum hasn't created a path to peace. It has turned the Iranian populace into a physical shield, making any subsequent military action a guaranteed humanitarian catastrophe.
Well, if we want to talk about how a system handles a crisis, I think treating the global economy like an electrical grid is a useful framework here.
Okay, I'm following.
You're arguing that if we apply a massive surge of voltage, meaning military force, to burn out a malicious node, we might blow out transformers in Europe and Asia.
Yes, precisely.
But if that node is already threatening to cut power to the entire continent by choking off the energy supply, applying overwhelming voltage to knock it offline is the only way to save the broader grid. Removing the threat of force from the table tells the adversary they permanently control the power switch.
Except your surge of voltage isn't saving the grid, it's forcing the rest of the world to build a completely separate electrical system.
What do you mean?
I mean the permanent alteration of global trade routes. The fallout from this diplomatic failure is accelerating structural independence from the West.
Oh, you're talking about the shadow fleets.
Yes, Asian nations have already struck independent, backdoor energy deals with Iran despite the looming Tuesday deadline. They are utilizing shadow fleets to move the oil.
Aging tankers flying flags of convenience.
Exactly, from places like Panama or Liberia. And they turn off their automatic identification system, their AIS trackers, and conduct ship-to-ship transfers of crude in the middle of the night just to obscure its origin.
Right, but
Asian economies are prioritizing their own energy security over compliance with U.S. sanctions because they cannot let their industrial manufacturing bases grind to a halt over a bilateral dispute in the Gulf.
Yep.
But you cannot run a planetary supply chain on black market Iranian crude and Russian shadow fleets. The sheer mechanics of what you're describing, turning off transponders, secretly transferring oil at sea, completely bypassing global insurance markets, it's incredibly inefficient and expensive. It is expensive, but it's happening.
We are mistaking the leaks in a dam for a new river. Russia profiting billions off the Hormuz blockade, that's war profiteering. It is opportunistic arbitrage in a distressed market. Moscow is simply selling its crude at a slight discount to the $110 panic price, capturing market share while the Strait is blocked.
It's more than just a temporary leak, though.
But it's not a sustainable shift in global macroeconomic policy. The volume of global commerce requires the explicit maritime security that only U.S. deterrence provides. The Harg Island strikes were a definitive message that the guarantor of that security is still willing to act.
I have to push back there. It is not just the leak in a dam. When the BRICS nations and the broader global South actively construct new financial architecture to bypass the U.S. dollar.
They've been trying to do that for years, though.
But this is the catalyst. These backdoor deals aren't just physically avoiding the U.S. Navy. They are financially avoiding the Western banking system by settling transactions in yuan, rupees, or local currencies.
In very limited volumes.
For now. But when a country in Latin America or Southeast Asia watches Washington unilaterally threaten total destruction, plunging global markets into chaos, they conclude that reliance on a Western-led financial system is a fatal strategic vulnerability.
But they still need the oil.
They do. But the mechanics of global power are fundamentally changing. And honestly, this intense focus on oil and ships and straits, it's a dangerously 20th century mindset. The battlefield has already expanded into the 21st century digital economy.
Okay, the domain may expand, but the logic of deterrence remains constant.
Does it?
Yes. If you are pointing to the threats emerging from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, targeting the UAE's data centers, that only proves my point.
How does threatening AI data centers prove your point?
Because the strikes on Iran's Karg Island oil terminal were a necessary, proportional response to Iran's physical attacks on Saudi infrastructure. It is a traditional deterrence model. You aim at crippling the opponent's financial ability to wage war.
If the IRGC expands their target list to include civilian digital infrastructure in the Emirates, that is an escalation on their part. It proves they are a rogue actor willing to burn down the future to protect their current regime.
See, the deterrence model you're championing is dangerously outdated because the threat matrix has evolved. The costs are fiercely asymmetric now.
A target is a target.
We need to unpack what the IRGC is actually threatening here. They are explicitly targeting the UAE's Stargate AI data centers. Stargate isn't just some localized server farm. It represents multi-billion-dollar investments by sovereign wealth funds to build the foundational artificial intelligence infrastructure of the Middle East.
I know. They're trying to diversify their entire economic future away from fossil fuels.
Exactly. So we are out here trying to play a game of 20th century battleship in the Strait of Hormuz, while the adversary has already realized the real hostage is the 21st century cloud. Dropping bombs on an oil terminal does absolutely nothing to protect a data center's cooling infrastructure or its subsea fiber optic cable landings.
It protects them by demonstrating the absolute cost of physical aggression.
But the assets aren't equivalent.
The principles of deterrence imposing unacceptable costs on an aggressor. They apply whether the target is an oil derrick or a massive server farm. Look, if we accept the premise that our digital infrastructure makes us too fragile to apply military deterrence, we effectively surrender the geopolitical board.
It's not surrender to recognize your own vulnerabilities.
But we be signaling that because we have built advanced, highly networked technology, we can no longer enforce freedom of navigation in international waters. That is a recipe for endless extortion. We cannot allow a threat against an AI data center to paralyze our ability to keep the Strait of Hormuz open.
Recognizing vulnerability is the basis of sophisticated statecraft. If you blow up Karg Island, you disrupt oil revenue. If the IRGC blows up Stargate, they disrupt the foundational architecture of the next technological revolution.
Both are critical.
But the deterrence isn't proportional because the fallout isn't proportional. A physical strike on a centralized AI node instantly halts billions in digital commerce. It interrupts global cloud services and freezes AI model training far beyond the borders of the UAE.
That's why they can't be allowed to strike it.
But my point is, it sends a chilling message to every tech conglomerate and capital investment firm on the planet that the region is structurally unsafe for digital infrastructure. When you apply maximum pressure without a viable diplomatic off-ramp, you guarantee the adversary will strike at the nodes where you are most exposed. And today, those nodes are deeply interconnected data centers, not just isolated oil tankers.
Well, the exposure works both ways. The planetary economic arteries, whether they carry millions of barrels of crude oil or petabytes of fiber optic data, they must be safeguarded against disruption by any state actor.
Safeguarded, yes, but not by throwing a match into a powder keg.
When a nation closes a vital maritime choke point, rejects regional ceasefires, and targets neighboring infrastructure, unambiguous kinetic force is the only mechanism that reestablishes boundaries. The pain of the cure does not invalidate its necessity.
Even if the cure kills the patient?
The temporary disruption of military strikes and hardline ultimatums is the price of maintaining a global system where trade can actually flow freely. Without that enforcement, the entire architecture of global commerce collapses into regional warlordism.
See, I think the strategy of issuing Stone Age ultimatums accomplishes that collapse all on its own. It is deeply myopic. It blindly expands the theater of war from traditional energy markets into critical digital infrastructure, pushing the global economy closer to the brink.
I just don't see another way out when the Strait is blocked.
But by acting as a blunt instrument, this approach generates second and third order effects that actively harm long-term strategic interests. It pushes Asian markets into independent, non-dollar energy agreements. It hands Russia a massive revenue stream through shadow fleet arbitrage. And it puts cutting-edge digital infrastructure directly in the crosshairs of asymmetric warfare. It's a systemic failure to map the complexity of the modern planetary economy. You're trading long-term structural stability for short-term tactical theater.
Well, the stakes of this crisis undoubtedly bridge two eras. I mean, we are watching the collision of old-world resource security, oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz, with new-world technological vulnerabilities like the Stargate AI infrastructure.
That's very true.
Both models require a secure, stable environment to function. And I think the fundamental disagreement here remains whether unilateral force acts as that stabilizer or as the disruptor.
And viewing this through a truly planetary lens really reveals how completely interconnected the modern system is. A unilateral deadline set in Washington or, a missile launch from Tehran, it doesn't just affect the Persian Gulf.
No, it ripples out instantly.
Instantly impacts a trading floor in Asia, a tech hub in the UAE, an energy supplier in Russia, and debt-burdened economies in Latin America. The mechanics of global power are shifting, and the actions taken this week will rewrite the rules of global trade for decades.
So, as you monitor the geopolitical and economic developments out of the Gulf leading up to the Tuesday deadline, remember the reality of the biological choke point. We live in a planetary body that is vast, powerful, and deeply networked, yet entirely capable of being brought to its knees by pressure on a single fragile artery.
There's definitely a lot more to explore here as the situation develops.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.